everybody, and welcome. We're about to start a panel, a very exciting discussion panel for the Virtual Island Summit. So this is a very exciting event to be a part of. First of all, this is a first of its kind online sustainable conference covering energy challenges and lessons learned for islands all over the world. So I would like to thank Island Innovation and James Ellsmore, as well as OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and congratulate them on this very exciting and informative event. And we are also very happy that this panel will cover a project on the island, on the beautiful island of St. Kitts, which is a member of OECS. So my name is Dagmara Avanindra. I will be the moderator for the session this morning, or whatever time of day it is where you are logging in from. I'm very happy to be part of this panel for a number of reasons. I live on the beautiful island of Aruba for the last 7 years. I've moved to Aruba because I was really attracted by its vision of becoming carbon neutral. And I wanted to do what I can to support this vision for Aruba and for all of the Caribbean. And through my work in the Caribbean, whether it's public sector or private sector, right now with my Dava Energy Solutions consulting company, I aim to do what I can to bring more sustainable, reliable solutions to the islands. And that is why I'm very happy to be part of this panel here today. We have a very exciting lineup of panelists today. So again, the name of the panel, if you're just dialing in, is Energy Independence for Island Nations, Building Sustainable and Resilient Microgrids. All of our panelists are extremely experienced and have a lot of not just technical knowledge, but hands-on knowledge, which we're very happy to share with you. We will have Brian Urban from Leclanche. He is Executive Vice President of Stationary Solutions. And he is also a head of North American Business Unit. We will also have Clement Jomo Williams, who is the General Manager of the St. Kitts Electricity Company. We'll also have Scott McCaw, Head of Business Development at HowardScott. They run and operate a really cool microgrid on the Portuguese island of Graciosa. And we also have Dwight Richards from JPS, Jamaica Public Services Company. He is a manager for the Grid Performance Department there, and he will share about very interesting projects with us. But first, to give a broad overview of this panel, as you know, the question of energy independence is very important for all of the island nations. The dependence on the price volatility and importing of fossil fuels leaves islands quite vulnerable. So that's why it is very important to look into solutions that will make us island nations empowered and more independent. So that is why I am very excited to have both Brian and Jomo on the panel today. So Brian Urban, as I mentioned before, is from Leclanche. Leclanche is a company, for those of you who are just hearing about it, who is a relative newcomer to the Caribbean market. They actually have been around for over 100 years, doing all kinds of cool innovations and stuff in the energy storage business. In fact, one of the recent milestones they hit recently is they installed over 100 megawatt hours of storage systems that are now operational just in the last 2 years. So, and I'm very interested to hear more from Brian and Leclanche's vision and Brian's vision on using storage for enabling energy independence on the island, so that our energy solutions now can become, our renewable energy solutions can become stable, frequency controlled, And as you may or may not know, solar will be used as a base load on the island of St. Kitts. And that's the first of its kind project on the Caribbean island. And I am very curious to hear, as are you, on Brian's vision for using storage as base load, using storage to prevent T&D costs, and other aspects of what is becoming possible with the progress in storage and microgrid control technologies. So without further ado, I would like to give the time to our panelists as much as possible because they have so much to share. So Brian, if you can please share your vision about microgrids, about storage to support renewable baseload, and your vision on St. Kitts projects. The screen is yours. Brian, are you still with us? Yes, great.
Yes, I am. I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Looks great.
Great, thanks. Again, welcome. This is Brian Urban with Leclanche. I think, thank you, Dagmar, and introduction. And I will try to provide a good overview and at the same time cover a lot in a short period. So first of all, just as Dagmar had mentioned, Leclanche, just a little bit of information. The company is over 100 years old, been in energy storage, I guess a little longer than most. Been a battery company in producing commercial scale battery systems for over a century, essentially, and have focused now in the lithium ion technology, predominantly in both stationary products, which are kind of the systems that we're talking about here with utility connected or behind the meter systems, as well as transportation sector and the commercial scale systems like buses and ferries and trams and trains and things like that, where we electrify with lithium ion technology. So a bit of background on Leclanche. We've been very active as noted in the last few years in designing and building and installing energy storage systems on what we consider stationary systems, which again are things that are connected to the grid, connected to renewable energy, and in some cases provided for commercial scale customers. What I want to focus on here is what a battery really represents and how it can help particularly an island location. And we've got a couple cases or projects that we've worked on that represent what I would call true microgrids or substantial microgrids. And because of the island location, have isolated opportunities for other generation capacity. So battery systems, and particularly the current lithium ion technology that we build and others that we deploy from others as well, can really help support some of the key things for the system. First of all, existing systems, predominantly in islands, are either are for the most part a lot of diesel generation, in some cases natural gas, some cases some biomass and geothermal. There's increasing amounts of solar energy and wind, but for the most historical, it's been conventional power systems. And those have certain elements of reliability, but also have certain elements of continued maintenance and cost, certainly when it comes to the cost of fuel. The battery systems, we're starting to see, as mentioned, more and more renewable energy implementation, and particularly with the wind resources and oftentimes solar resources in island locations. It's ideal conditions for those types of new systems. So we want to be a big part of that, and the battery really can be the center of that system, utilizing and integrating the solar, the wind, the current diesel generation, interfacing with the grid, and help balance and manage the load, and really the grid stability as well. And we'll touch on a lot of that coming up here, but that's a important standpoint for us and aspect in terms of how these can be used and what benefits they can provide. So we call it kind of the heart of the system. This is a couple examples you'll see on the screen, just some pictures of those that aren't familiar, maybe with what it would look like. Exterior often looks like a number of containers that are, shipping containers that have been modified to include the batteries. And when we call about a battery system, it's inclusive of the inverters, the power conversion systems, the transformers, all the cabling related to that. And so that's a kind of a complete package. And then again, also the interface, both physically and from a software systems perspective to the utility. Interior, you see on the left, is just basically modules and stacks and racks of battery systems. Oftentimes they look like a server farm for a data server. So that's a quick snapshot of what it looks like. For us, I want to focus a little bit on two things we're doing in terms of a project, that we're working with Skellick, the power company in St. Kitts on, and that is really trying to create what we call dispatchable or base load renewable energy from a fluctuating resource. In this case, we're utilizing solar and the solar capacity during the day to help charge the battery and provide a very stable profile to the utility. So this, you'll see on the screen, is kind of an example of what the customer load may look like on an island, oftentimes a daily peak and then an evening peak as things ramp up after sundown, and then quieter through the evening hours. But in this case, we're seeing a customer load, and we're trying to balance the generation profile of solar with that fluctuating, that load profile. And oftentimes, the solar radiation is very good, but because of the tropical environments, oftentimes you're seeing cloud cover interruptions throughout the day, and that can have a significant impact on the grid if you're just connecting solar without any buffer of a battery system. So solar generation, as you see, can kind of vary here. And what we're trying to do with battery systems is take that solar generation and create a very strong baseload profile for the utility. So something that the utility can count on and rely on, and also have planning around that in terms of their other generation capacity, and take it into the evening hours when it's important to cover some of the peak aspects. So that's an important part of what we're doing, or sizing and scaling our battery to represent. So basically a load profile to a base load profile. This just kind of, last indication, shows a little bit of how the state of charge of the battery changes over time. The green line represents the state of charge. So you're seeing during the morning, you go into the day at about 5% charge rate, and the solar will take it up. It fluctuates. It responds to the changes in cloud cover and the conditions of solar, and then through the evening hours, it discharges and provides a stable, consistent flow of power to the utility. This again, just an example of how the battery, as it's charging, it's also reacting to the capacity and the requirements of modifications for sun, cloud cover, and the like. So ultimately, we looked at have it charge and then discharge during the evening hours. But again, this is, again, what we would term as a dispatchable renewable. And by utilizing the battery systems, it helps to the utility to be able to dictate when and how they want to best utilize the solar generation that's given. And with the main objective in all this is to have the maximum penetration of renewable energy. The investment made in solar or wind or other renewables, certainly you want to take the greatest advantage of that in offsetting some of the current fuel charges that incurred. So that's one, I would say, broad aspect of what the battery systems can do. The second one I want to highlight here is what we term as kind of grid management, resiliency, and efficiency. So not only can we take the solar energy during the day produced and extend it into the evening hours and maximize the baseload capacity, but we can also use the battery systems essentially to help stabilize the grid and take that burden away from the existing diesel or conventional generation that has to ramp and fluctuate to a point where the battery can provide that a very constant, the existing generation can be set at a very constant level and then the fluctuation, kind of the noise in the system can be absorbed through the battery system. So here's a couple examples of when we take, when we produce under the battery, the grays represents kind of the diesel generation, and solar and battery represent the other factors here. And when, as you can see, the fluctuation in voltage, fluctuation in load, fluctuation in frequency, all those things put stress on the grid, create resiliency issues, put stress on the generation capacity that's managing those aspects, and also reduce efficiency, particularly in like spinning reserve when we've got spinning reserve capacity online, running in idle mode to absorb those fluctuations. Again, the battery, some advanced lithium-ion technology we're deploying can handle that very, very well and very quickly. So instead of the diesel profile of ramping this constantly, you'll see the battery can react to that and reacts to it very quickly. Secondly, and not only reacts quickly, but reacts very accurately. So because battery systems can essentially react in millisecond time frame or less than 1 second, a change in frequency or a modification in voltage can be corrected quickly, so it actually reduces the total impact of that fluctuation. Whereas conventional generation reacts, but certainly not at that kind of speed. Ultimately, what we would like to try to do with this ability for the battery is to give a profile to the utility that is very consistent, so they can set their diesel generation or other conventional generation at the most optimal and efficient levels. And by predicting the capacity or the requirements an hour or day in advance and an hour ahead in advance, we can give a real consistent forecast to the utility and provide like I said, take care of some of the fluctuation and noise through the battery. So in this case, every hour the utility in this would be able to know where their diesel engines in this case would be set and how to operate them in the most efficient manner. That's kind of a high level of where we see battery systems being utilized and how they can especially help in island locations and grids that have varying levels of dependency in generation and transmission, and also have some fluctuation capacity as needed. So I think I'll pass this on. I'm sure we'll have questions in the future. But,
thank you, Brian, for this presentation. It's generating a lot of interest. I see just from some of the people who are logging in and are with us all over the world, literally, like Romania, Scotland, Jamaica, Bermuda, Mauritius, Haiti, Argentina, St. Croix, of course, lots of places in the Caribbean, Germany, Orkney Islands. So James, could you actually run the poll, please, of the people who are attending? Can we get a quick feeling where are our attendees from today? Definitely, there's a lot of interest. And as Brian, as you mentioned, creating dispatchable baseload from renewable energy generation, it's definitely a great concept. And I think the concept we've been striving for quite a while. And something we've been working towards on Aruba for quite a while as well. And it's a very great to see that Leclanche and your team are able to implement in a cost-effective manner, because having a cost-effective renewable baseload has been indeed the challenge. And someone like yourself, who's been instrumental in building and commissioning over 9,000 of megawatt of power generation, which is just mind-blowing, and someone who's had experience in all kinds of different generations, from natural gas, wind, hydro, biomass, solar, even coal, which we will not hold against you. It's great to see that there is this now real implementable solution for renewable as baseload. And that is why I'm very excited to introduce next Clement Jomo Williams, who is the general manager of Skelec. He is a very experienced professional in both engineering and management, and he has been instrumental in transitioning Skelec from being a government department to being its own incorporated entity, and which is of course very important for effective decision making. And one of the things that I would like to hear, and I'm sure he will share at a certain point, how this project has come together from the Skelec side, from Leclanche side, and in my view, from observing other Caribbean projects, you guys seem to have come to an agreement which all the sides are happy with in a very short amount of time. Of course, that speaks a lot for the building relationships and building connection. That's something I know Jomo believes strongly in. That is something I would say Brian believes strongly in, based on all of the multiple trips that he's been taking to St. Kitts to build a relationship and to really understand where Skelec is coming from, where Ministry of Energy is coming from. So I would like to turn over the screen now to Jomo to talk about this really amazing and exciting project on St. Kitts. The screen is yours.
All right. Thank you, Dagmara. First of all, hello to everybody viewing from the beautiful island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. What can I say about the project? It's very important for us here at St. Kitts, and I'll give you a bit of a history, a little bit of a background. Now, the island of St. Kitts is roughly 70 square miles and has a customer base of about 20,000 people. Our available capacity in terms of diesel generation is about 43 megawatts. And with this system, we're going to see approximately 175,000 kilowatt hours of energy being saved through solar. The company itself is 100% owned by the government of St. Kitts, and part of our challenge is that even though we as the engineering team have our strict ideas of how we want to run the utility. Because it's a government-owned utility, the government pretty much has the final say. So us as the engineers, we tell them what we want. The finance people, they tell us what we can afford to do. And then the government essentially tells us what we are going to do, roughly. So back in 2000, there was a mandate to go 100% renewable energy. Now, geothermal energy was the talk of the moment, as there's a viable source in the sister island of Nevis, which is a couple miles away. But unfortunately, that comes to fruition. So the bill was amended, and now we have a target of 60% renewable energy by 2025. Now, with this project with Leclanche, we're gonna have about a 30% penetration with the system. Now, the specifics of the system, it's 35 megawatts of solar with 15 megawatts of battery, 45 megawatt hours of storage. So as I said, that's going to be 175,000 kilowatt hours. That's going to be saved through the implementation of the project by Leclanche. All this is being done through a PPA. The cost, I can't go too much into. I'll probably let Brian deal with that one, as we're bound by an NDA. And what I can say though is it's pretty much in line with our understanding of what the regional costs are for battery energy storage systems. So how did all this start? Back about maybe 4 years ago, we started realizing that because of our aging infrastructure, we needed to add additional generation capacity. Now, I mentioned earlier that the government had made a mandate for renewable energy penetration. So therefore they told us, no, whatever you do, it has to be from a renewable source. So that's when Leclanche got called to the table. From the onset, it was always back and forth until we all essentially got together and decided on the way forward. Now, since then, we've had a series of meetings, workshops. We had a workshop just up to yesterday, and this project is well in the advanced stage to be operational sometime next year. We expect groundbreaking to be within the next couple months, and we're definitely looking forward to getting it done. One thing I must mention is that the Leclanche team has been very supportive through this entire thing. In St. Kitts, we have had a challenge in terms of our technical capacity. When the utility started back in the 50s, there probably might have been 1 or 2 local engineers. Being a former British colony, the engineers associated with the power station essentially were from the UK. Now, yesterday at our workshop, we had at least 10 engineers from the Skellig side. Now, 10 engineers out of a staff of 150, 160 persons. You can see that is a great achievement for us. And the Leclanche team actually ran out of questions for us because anything they brought forward, we were able to answer. And that's the type of relationship that we have had over the past, I would say, year and a half or so. And we're looking forward to a bright future, no pun intended. how the system is going to work, as Brian mentioned, it's going to be roughly a day ahead dispatch. So 24 hours before the actual dispatch, he's going to tell us what they predict, and then we will be able to schedule our generation accordingly. Now, there is some leeway in terms of inclement weather, where we can charge the battery system on the off-peak hours. But when we run the scenarios, those days are going to be few and far between. Usually, maybe during hurricane season, but for the rest of the year, it will be pretty much a predictable dispatch, and we'll be able to plan our generation around the entire thing. Um, uh, there's not much else that I can say about the project right now, but I'll definitely be able to entertain any questions that come up from the chat or the panelists. So I'll hand it back over.
Perfect. Thank you, Jomo, so very much for this. Really great to hear about it. For me, and I'm sure for many others who are online, I'm really excited to hear about the great relationship that you have established with Leclanche. It is so important, and I think especially for us who live on small islands, we fully appreciate the significance of that. So I'm really excited to see, you said 35 megawatts of solar, 15 megawatts of battery, and 45 megawatt hours of storage. That's really amazing, one of its kind. Really looking forward to have this sort of in my backyard, in my Caribbean backyard. There are a lot of questions already coming in for this. But for now, I would like to turn to Scott McCaw next. Now, he's going to talk to us about a very interesting project. And speaking of people who are passionate about bringing and renewable generation, sustainable generation for the islands, Scott is definitely one of such people. If you pick in his LinkedIn profile, his official title is Defender of the Universe, which I'm a big fan of. And Scott comes to us from HowardScott. They own and operate a really cool microgrid on the beautiful Portuguese island of Graciosa. I'm putting on my travel list in the immediate future. And so that is a very comprehensive microgrid. It boasts 6 megawatts, 3.2 megawatt hour energy storage management system. It has solar, 1 megawatt of solar. It has 4.5 megawatts of wind and solar, as well as they have some diesel gensets present. Now, the connection to this panel, the system uses Leclanche batteries, and so this is another example of Leclanche's 100-year-old history of energy storage and energy storage management. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it to Scott to talk to us about the Isle of Graciosa, where, as far as I understand, this microgrid covers about 60 to 70% of island's energy needs. So Scott, without further ado, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Dagmara. Is that so? Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and happy today to be able to tell you a little bit about a project that we're very proud to be involved in on the island of Graciosa. I will start by saying very briefly who HowardScott is, and then get into Graciosa, project overview, some of the technical parameters in the project, and then finish off with some of the things that we have learned during the process. HowardScott's an independent company developing clean energy solutions for corporates, utilities, and government. Our solutions cover power production, energy management, energy storage, and are driven by technology integration. We try to implement commercially viable, sustainable solutions, and we provide turnkey solutions, including finance. So on to Graciosa itself. Essentially the project is about substituting thermal power, diesel, with wind and solar PV. We have a large-scale battery storage, which was installed, procured by Leclanche. It's the chemistry is lithium titanate, and this provides grid forming capability, which allows 100% renewable energy supply under appropriate conditions. Basically, if the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, then we are able to supply 100% of the island with renewable energy. On average, because we are forming the grid with renewable base load, we're able to provide a very high renewable penetration rate. We're aiming at 70%, but we are certainly somewhere between 60 and 70%. The system also provides black start capability and acts as a spinning reserve. I've put up there, this is a picture of the island itself. So we have, on one side of the island, we had the pre-existing diesel power station, and that is where we've built a battery power plant and a PV plant. On the other side of the island, we've built a wind park, and the two are connected with an overhead line. Diesel power plant that was pre-existing has 6 engines and total rated power of 4.6 megawatts. We put in a 1 megawatt solar farm, a large battery power plant with 7.5 megawatts of rated power and 2.6 megawatt hours of usable capacity. So you can see down on the bottom there, that's essentially the battery power plant building here. We have the solar PV installation at the back and the existing diesel power plant next to it. On the wind farm, we had 5 900 kilowatt turbines from Enercon with a total rated power of 4.5 megawatt. And as I said before, they're on the other side of the island and connected with an overhead line. From a technical perspective, this is a single line diagram of the island of Graciosa. We have the diesel gensets. So red is off and green is on across the middle here, and the actual load substations in various parts of the island across the top. I took this screenshot a couple of days ago when I was putting this presentation together. So this is an actual shot of what is going on the island of Graciosa at that time. Down at the bottom here, we have the wind turbines of the wind farm. And then here we have the battery energy storage system with 3 inverters. What's, I think, a few interesting things that came out of this project. One is the improvement to the quality of the power on the island when we connected up the system, and that significantly improved the voltage profile and frequency profile. Over here, you can see on the right, basically the top illustration is voltage profile, and this is from the point before the renewable power plant was connected to the grid, and after. You can see the voltage flattening out, frequency flattening out, and the harmonics doing the same. It's significantly improved the continuity of supply on the island. Since we have been operating, there's been 3 load shedding events that have been avoided. So, you know, when there wasn't sufficient renewables, diesel engines running, and a diesel engine has tripped, the battery steps in and supports the grid until another diesel engine can be restarted. reliable and robust system response following short circuit events. There's plenty of short circuits on the island and on the island load feeders, and they're cleared in less than 300 milliseconds and restoring voltage and frequency to the nominal values. This is the sort of the heart of the system is a energy management system, which is basically controlling the frequency and voltage. It's also managing the relationship between the renewable energy sources, the diesel as a backup, and the battery. This is an overview where you can see the frequency at the top, and you notice how stable the frequency is at 50 hertz. The voltage. The line below is interesting. This is a snapshot for the last 7 days, and this shows the renewable penetration of the system. Gray is diesel, and green is renewable. So you can see some sections through here that are 100% renewable. Also some sections where there's no renewable. That would be when at nighttime when there's no wind. This snapshot I took, this was taken earlier today, I think. And you can see at the time I took it, wind was contributing with 31% of the asset loading, solar with 33, and diesel with 34. As far as consumption, the load on the island was 93, and at this particular time, there was some charge going into the battery. So here's another shot. This is showing over a period of time, again, the last week, how the black line is the load or consumption on the island. The brown is diesel, the yellow is solar, the blue is wind, and green is battery. So when green is below the line, that is the battery contributing energy to the grid, and when green is above the line, that is the battery being charged. Details on the battery as far as voltage, power, and state of charge. You can see on the state of charge that the operating parameters in this case are primarily between 40% and 80% state of charge. One of the restrictions or parameters we have in this project is looking after the utility's existing diesel engines, and we had to agree with the utility how many times we could stop and start engines. Basically, there's a cost associated with that, and they were they were very sensitive about how hard we were to drive the engines. And so there's a very advanced forecasting system in terms of wind, sun, and that interacts with forecasting which diesel engines are required when. In this picture, the gray line is the point in time where I took this snapshot. So you have the history behind the gray line in terms of which diesel engines were making up the diesel contribution. Blue is renewable, green is battery. And after the gray line is the forecasting of which diesel engines will need to be rotated in order to provide the necessary power. What have we produced so far? We were in operation at the end of December. That was our final testing. And then we joined the grid again from July, entered commercial operations in August. And you can see here, what I was trying to show was the level of renewable penetration. So 62% while we were connected in December, 69% in July, 50 in August. That's the least windy month in Graciosa. September 57. And on the right here showing the number of days where we had 100% renewable penetration. That's a pretty good feeling when the entire island is running on stable renewable energy. Project partners, as Dagmar mentioned, Leclanche provided the battery energy storage system and acted as the main EPC contractor. And there were a number of other partners involved in pulling the project together. Key challenges, what we learned, among other things, technical integration of the different technologies. That was definitely challenging. Grid management, we had some serious challenges dealing with technical solutions to short circuits, how to identify when it was a short circuit as opposed to a dip in the grid itself. And multiple stakeholders. We had utility, which is our client, the government, people on the island itself, all led to lots and lots of fun and some good challenges. Future opportunities, well, the 6 other islands which are interesting in the Azores, there's 286 islands in the EU, and there's thousands of islands globally, not least in the Caribbean. So we're very excited to have completed this project and have it in commercial operation, and we're now looking very much forward to other opportunities where we can implement similar technology to bring good, sustainable green energy to islands. Thank you very much.
Scott, thank you so much for this presentation. Really interesting. Some of the things that sound like music to my ears is improved voltage and frequency profile for the island, as well as improved continuity of supply on the island. And that is very exciting because until recently, renewables were associated with volatility. But now with the, I guess, more affordable, accessible energy storage technologies and microgrid control systems, this renewable energy is able to bring more reliable power supply to the islands, which is critical when you live on a small island. Every blackout and brownout and burnt out refrigerator and computer, we're all very sensitive to that. So I really love the part of the energy stability. I did a quick calculation. So I think you had about 50 days this year so far where you had 100% renewable penetration, which is also really super exciting. And also thank you for sharing the live snapshots of the system. That is also very interesting. As they say, the picture is worth 1,000 words. And so for now, I would like to transition to our next speaker, Dwight Riches from JPS. Really excited to have him on the panel for a number of reasons. Jamaica is, of course, one of the larger islands in the Caribbean, and in some ways they are pioneers in bringing renewable energy on the utility scale online. Basically, around 2016, all of a sudden, there were a lot of renewables online from a BMR wind farm, from Wington wind farm, from a 20 megawatt solar wind farm. And of course, this year, there's another wind farm that's just came out online, the long-awaited Paradise Park. And so there's, of course, a lot for Jamaica to deal with as far as grid stability is concerned. So Dwight has been with JPS for over 15 years. He is responsible for grid optimization solutions, power purchase agreement negotiations, power plant integrations, and the operational and technical management. So in 2017, he facilitated the commissioning of approximately 80 megawatts of renewable energy to a Jamaican power grid. Also, Jamaica is working on a very interesting storage project as you already can see on the screen, 24.5 megawatt hybrid energy storage project, which JPS initiated once they had to deal with all the renewables online. And of course, the challenges that Jamaica hit were a couple years before St. Kitts. So this is, we all know, storage technologies have undergone a huge exponential changes in the last couple of years. So it is really interesting for us to see how Jamaica has been implementing grid stability solutions for the island since they've been working on this for already a couple years, kind of feet on the ground type of thing. So without further ado, Dwight, you have the floor.
Hey, morning. Well, it's morning here in Jamaica. Thank you, Dagmar, for that extensive overview. Myself would like to go through just how we got to implementing or halfway into implementing this 24.5 megawatt hybrid energy storage system. So just a background of our power system. First received electricity in 1892. We're pretty much a vertically integrated island utility. We have an firm installed generating capacity of just over 900 megawatts, 640 of which is JPS owned. The remaining 262 megawatts is privately owned, and pretty much we have several power purchase agreements with several IPPs, both in the renewable space and in the firm generating capacity space. Just a further breakout of our renewable portfolio. So JPS do have a 3 megawatt wind farm. The Wigtons and the BMRs, they make up that 98 megawatts of wind. And as Dagmara mentioned, we have a 20 megawatt solar facility that was before a couple months ago was the largest solar farm, I think, in the Caribbean. Now it has now been replaced with 8 Rivers in Westmoreland with a 37 megawatt capacity. Well, it's actually 51 megawatt install capacity, but they have a contractual agreement with JPS to produce 37 megawatts to the grid. So what our demand looks, typically our demand looks like 655. That happened sometime in 2016. Our transmission network, we operate on 2 transmission voltages, 69 kilovolts, 138 kilovolts, approximately 1,184 kilometers of transmission line. Our distribution system pretty much operating on three voltages. As you can see, 12 kilovolts, 13.8, 24 kilovolts, and that's roughly 11,000 kilometers of distribution line. We have approximately 27 generating units, some of which shortly will be retired. 43 substations, and our customer base is just over 600,000. We operate in a regulated space. We are regulated by the Office of Utilities Regulation. Just our background, how we got here. So back in 2015, we conceptualized Vision 2030. And in a nutshell, what that meant for the energy security and efficiency for Jamaica was that we recognized that we were overly dependent on fossil fuel to produce electricity and from manufacturing. So the aim was pretty much by 2030 to increase our renewable portfolio to represent roughly 20% of our energy should be coming from renewable resources. We also are signatories to the Paris Climate Change Agreement of 2016. So with the government push and the utility here at JPS recognition of the need to contribute to the fast evolving issues in terms of climate change, we as a utility recognize that it's really important that we hastily come on board and recognize that climate change is something real, and and our carbon footprints, definitely, even though it's a bit insignificant to this grand scheme of things at 0.04%, but nevertheless, we pretty much are fully on board with the government and the government policy. So before 2015, we had, prior to 2016, we had approximately 41 megawatts of wind grid connected. That represented a very small percentage of our energy mix. In 2016, we commissioned roughly over 80 megawatts of wind and solar at the time. And currently, since June, we commissioned another 37 megawatts. So if you can just look closely on how we had increased over the past couple of years. So what happened was that with this rapid increase in our renewable space, we started experiencing some challenges, some real challenges. In hindsight, I think it could have been planned a little, the integration could have been planned a little bit more careful, but I guess we were very, it's a useful exuberance, we just wanted to get it and get it done. So before 2017, with our demand of over 900 megawatts and our renewable portfolio was just over 120 megawatts, we had roughly wind making up 11% of that capacity and solar 2%, about over 13% at the time. This represented, if we should do the maths, this represented on an average day peak, represented roughly 21% of satisfying our demand of say 580. And in off peak, it could go up to about 30%. Our off peak is around about 400 megawatts. Fast forward to 2018, with this addition of 80 megawatts, this increase to up towards 40% of our demand could be attributed to energy coming from our wind and our solar facilities. This presented, as I said before, significant challenges because one, the contracts that we have with these IPPs, there were no curtailments involved, so it was take as available, and there were no storage facility attached to these projects. So the utility had to just respond with either having a lot of spinning reserve available just in case we should have a decline in the wind production or cloud cover that affected the solar facilities. So it was really, I would say, a really challenging period for us at the utility. We've been hitting other frequencies. Voltage naturally was affected. And as a utility, customers definitely were complaining at the time. And also to top that off, our old firm capacity generating fleets, they were really sluggish in really responding to these quick ramps, these up and down ramps from these facilities. So just to give an idea, if, for example, we should hit a stage 0 on the frequency point, we're talking about over 60,000 customers out of supply. And this is an automatic operating load shedding scheme. So once we're down, our frequency hit those targets, we're going to lose customers. So how we responded. So in 2016, we recognized the need for some form of support. in the form of storage. At the time, I figured out if it was batteries, flywheels, pump storage, or just brainstorming. So we formed an energy, and of course, went to several conferences, liaised with several other persons that were experiencing the same issue and what were their approach. So in 2016, back in September 2016, we formed the Energy Storage Committee, and we went through the entire stakeholder engagement, exploring storage providers. Fast forward, we pretty much narrowed down everything based on recommendations from consultants. What was, I would say, an optimal solution at the time for JPS, and that was in the form of a hybrid energy storage system, which had a little bit of flywheel and predominantly lithium batteries. So the solution pretty much had 3 megawatts of slow speed flywheels and 21.5 megawatts of lithium-ion batteries. And it was going to provide, this is 3, but actually four solutions. Spring reserve to replace approximately 20 megawatts of thermal reserve, frequency regulation, voltage control, and also renewable smoothing is also a feature that will be a part of the solution. This is a space, it is pretty much is located close to one of our substation, and the project site is, well, not close, but exactly next to in Kingston. That was the chosen site for several reasons. That's the space right there. So as I mentioned before, the preferred bidder was ABB out of roughly 9 bidders with 27 options.
Why we can't hear you?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So the scope of the project, JPS in-house has several expertise, so we pretty much broke out the project into ABB just supplying the batteries, and the PCS and the flywheel, supply the medium voltage pad mounted transformers, and supervise the installation of the batteries and commission the system. On the other hand, JPS undertook the construction of concrete bases, the transportation and placement of equipments, the interconnection cables. So we did some extensive job in-house on this project. And also it was chosen this way so that our expertise in-house could be advanced as it relates to energy storage going forward. So we broke the project out into 2 phases. The first phase was a 1 megawatt slow speed flywheel installed with 8.6 of the lithium battery. That phase has been completed and is in service. The second phase is due to be, well, work is underway as we speak. Second phase is due to be completed at the end of October. I pretty much think it probably will go over into November based on what's happening on the ground. So that's a flow of how it started and where we're at now. As I said before, we're expected to be completed in October, but possibly, probably we'll see it going over into November. These are just some pictures of the facility. I think Brian had some similar pictures with containerized type of setup. That's pretty much typical for energy storage systems. And that's an aerial shot of the conceptual layout of the site. So what were some of the project challenges? Equipment delays, design coordination and errors, you know, reworks, civil delays, some underestimation on some cost overruns because of some reworks that we had to do. So this was pretty much just a snapshot of the system in operation prior to July. We have 30 discharges, 30 operations, over 30 operations. So this is a similar snapshot that I think I saw Brian also showing the charging and discharging of the system. So this was a significant event that had us, you know, in smiles, and we're saying, well, good work. So we had a ramping event from our solar facility in Karna, which is the 20 megawatt facility. We had a quick ramp, and we had the system responding immediately to avert any under frequency. So that this event was really an eye-opener for us in terms of the possibility of storage and how it can really respond and avert the undesirables. And pretty much that's our experience. I thank you all for your attentiveness.
Thank you so much for sharing this. This is a really interesting experience from the point of view that first you were pretty much given this is how much renewables you have online, and there was so much fluctuation on the JPS grid, the brownouts and the blackouts, that you guys had to real quick figure out how to bring grid stability, and indeed you chose this largest energy solution to date in the Caribbean as far as operations go. So thank you so much for sharing this. As you guys can imagine, we have a lot of questions. We only have 23 minutes left. I'm going to start picking some of them. So one of the question is on project financing. So we have a few questions on that because of course, the projects like this with microgrid projects, with solar as baseload, with large storage projects, this is significant projects for these solar plus storage systems. What are your thoughts? How can there be financing solutions done to get around the large upfront capex situation? So Brian, do you have thoughts on that? And then maybe Scott.
Impact there. First of all, I think what's important is to identify, a solid project in terms of fundamentals, and then put that in place with a long-term power contract or some type of offtake arrangement. I think the importance that, to support the financing capacity over, extended period of time. And that's a case of what we're working with St. Kitts project, and also I think what Scott has seen in Graciosa. But it really, fundamentals are the strength of the power contract to start with. And so that's step one. There's an increasing amount of interest. There's certainly significant interest in global renewable energy financing, and increasing interest in pairing that with battery storage systems, particularly a case where we're seeing savings, you're gaining savings off of existing diesel and consumption. It makes sense for the utilities and can justify, a reasonable recovery of investment and investment returns. So the combination of an island location with its price, with the cost of its current existing diesel or existing generation, usually has a good balance to where solar and storage particularly can be cost effective and save money and still provide decent returns to the investors. Scott, if you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with Brian that the two elements. One is actual savings, and in the case of Graciosa, the power purchase agreement is actually linked to the diesel savings by the utility, and that's quite a nice balanced approach. But in order for capital to flow, Brian's absolutely right that it comes down to the offtake agreement, and then the off-taker. So what is the counterparty risk? And if the counterparty risk is not bankable, then some work needs to be done in order to shore up the offtake so that capital can flow properly. And I think that's absolutely one of the challenges, and what needs to be done in order for sufficient capital to flow into these projects is continued work to be done around the strength of the offtake power agreements.
Yeah, just add a point to that as well is if in the event you can really truly demonstrate savings, it certainly helps underpin the strength of adding the capacity, and that way it prevents a bit of a cushion in terms of financial cushion by a demonstration of savings, like Scott mentioned.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. So I think the next question, which I will select, is another trend, and I think it leads in the previous question, leads into the next one, is what are your thoughts in transitioning to 100% renewables? When do you think it's going to be economically feasible? And maybe anybody on the panel is welcome to share thoughts on that. Maybe Joma, would you like to start? What are your thoughts on moving towards 100% renewable? And maybe I missed that part. How much of the current system that you will be developing with Leclanche, how much of the power is going to be providing for the island?
Hi, yeah. The island of St. Kitts definitely can do 100% renewable energy, especially because the neighboring island of St. Kitts, Nevis, has the potential to do geothermal. So once the geothermal plant is established over in St. Kitts, we can definitely benefit from that via an undersea cable. At this point, there are a few limitations that can be overcome, but the mix of the right energies is what's going to be critical for that to happen.
Yeah, this is Brian. I'd just add to that. I think as Joe indicated, the potential of having a baseload geothermal facility really supplements the variability of the solar facility or the daily generation produced by the solar facility. What we've seen is if you're trying to just pair solar and battery systems solely, you get to a point of kind of diminishing returns in terms of total cost. And that's probably in the 70 to 80% renewable base. Oftentimes by just trying to get that last incremental piece, those last 10% or even 5%, it really becomes almost not really cost effective. So if you're talking purely on solar, that's a benchmark, I would say 70 to 80% maximum probably. Adding wind or, for evening hours and certainly geothermal or biomass capacity, something like that would certainly help facilitate the evening hours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We have a lot of questions to Dwight regarding flywheels, as to why you chose the I'm going to try to summarize some of them. Would you choose them again? Does it aid to operational costs?
All right, the flywheel was pretty much chosen because of its instantaneous response. So it's more on the frequency control side of things. We are, as I mentioned, we have just commissioned just 1 megawatt, and these are just small bursts of energy, roughly 16 seconds of energy. It has been, based on the size, has been performing as expected. I think we'd wait to realize when we have that 3 megawatts, how effective it is. The studies have shown that it will act as that first responsive frequency for us. And yes, would choose flywheel again, probably not the slow, medium, low speed, but probably medium speed in the future.
Okay, thank you, Dwight. And since we are talking about frequency regulation, I would like to now turn the next question to Brian. Can you comment on using batteries for frequency regulation?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this earlier, and I think Scott is in his presentation demonstrated the effectiveness of battery systems because of the ability for particularly lithium-ion technologies to react very quickly and accurately. We can, when implemented, you're seeing very stable frequency levels being transmitted on the grid, and the batteries can absorb those types of fluctuations, like I said, quickly and effectively. We have projects in North America and Europe that are pure frequency regulation on large scale grids like PJM or the German grid, where we're constantly fluctuating. And what happened actually in PJM when they installed battery systems in the frequency regulation market, it created almost a 30% efficiency gain, just because of the way they reacted quickly and effectively when battery systems were implemented. The amount of frequency difference was dramatically reduced. So it's a really good application, and it's important by scale to add that with when you have when you have battery storage. It's an additional nice feature that you can add pretty cost effectively.
Great, thank you so much for this clarification. Next, I would like to jump into recycling. We have another question trending on recycling. Have any of you, well, I'm sure you have, what are your thoughts on recycling the batteries once they age out? All of these systems, Graciosa, St. Kitts, Jamaica, these are all islands where most of us have issues with waste processing as is. How are you planning to handle that? And let's maybe all of us comment. So maybe we'll start with Jomo first.
Yeah, this is actually one of the major points of discussion we've recently had, and we're working in conjunction with our local solid waste management corporation to figure out the best way to approach this. For us, being relatively new in the industry, we have taken into consideration some of the difficulties that our other colleagues have had in the past. So what we are going to do is put a proper plan in place to make sure that everything is accountable for, and it's all done according to law in the best interest of the environment.
Yeah, I would just add to that with conjunction with JOMO, when we have part of our environmental approach is to demonstrate the way we would utilize the batteries. First of all, reutilize potentially the batteries, or if they truly are at their end of their life, then promote a recycling plan. And lithium-ion technology can be recycled. It is clearly a market that's developing. The industry as a whole is being bolstered by the fact that the auto industry is predominantly using lithium-ion technology, and the large car manufacturers are taking it very seriously for us, we're kind of being able to live on those coattails a bit in terms of the advancement in technologies for recycling lithium batteries. And so we see that as, its cost effectiveness will improve. Right now, the technology is clearly there, but the cost effectiveness will improve with the implementation of electric vehicle markets, which frankly, dwarf the stationary business. Electric vehicle market is going to really dominate a lot of the batteries. That's
Perfect, Scott.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue. We have fortunate in the case of Graciosa project to have batteries which are rated to last the journey, so 20 to 25 years. I think that the development of the recycling market within lithium and batteries generally is developing pretty quickly. So we're definitely aware we're going to need to find a good solution, but we think that as Brian said, the car battery market is going to lead the way in terms of recycling and secondhand markets, and how we make sure that we don't leave a non-sustainable mark by using batteries as storage.
Perfect. Dwight?
Yes, interesting question, Dagmar, and I just the same hope as Scott also, where as that 20-25 years approaches at the end of life of the battery, we'll hope that that market evolves. And we definitely here at JPS do have an extensive department that does recycling, even of our transformers when they reach their end of their useful life. So we have that mechanism here. It's just the other side of the fence, watching to see that develop, so we can have that smooth transition when that happens.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question, again, has to do somewhat with the lifespan of the batteries, is using batteries for frequency regulation. How do you expect the lifespan of the battery to be affected when it is used so heavily for frequency regulation, since frequency regulations involve so many on and off cycles, which tend to degrade the battery lifetime and performance? Brian, would you like to start with that one, Snap?
Yeah, sure. I definitely would. I think first and foremost, it comes into the original design. You have to select the right type of battery system for the right application. And there's a number of different lithium-ion technologies, and even within the chemistry technologies, there's different power and energy-focused batteries. And so it requires you to select the battery that can handle the ramping up and down, potentially oversize it if necessary a bit to reduce the impact. As Scott alluded to, there are certain battery technologies, one of which we produce, that has a really long life cycle to it and can ramp up and down very effectively. But essentially, that's where it starts. And it's an important aspect on the front end. The most important thing is to look at on the front end.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
I was just going to chip in something there. I think it interesting to hear other people's views. And I mean, in our case in Graciosa, actually the cycling is very minimal. If you're only dealing with the frequency regulation, the battery is doing many cycles, but they're mini cycles. And I think that that's quite different to if you are, of course it depends on the chemistry, but it's quite different to if you're fully charging a battery during the day and then depleting it fully at night. So we're seeing extremely positive numbers coming out of the Leclanche batteries that we've installed in terms of many small cycles, and things looking extremely robust.
Great, thank you so much. That's a very interesting perspective. Would any of the panelists like to add to this question before we move to the next one?
Yes, so that is also one of the advantages of using the combo that we chose, the flywheel as a first response to frequency. That reduces how how the batteries, the duty cycle of the batteries. And also, as Scott just mentioned, we pretty much do not have our batteries discharging to 0% at any point in time. So that will also add to the longevity of the batteries. And also, we do have the fleet of generators that do also support frequency via our governor controls. So that also helps with the longevity of the batteries.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I now would like to jump into the question about different battery technologies. So in the projects we discussed, everybody sounds like is using lithium ion. That seems to be the most popular default technology. But we are getting questions about flow batteries, for example. What are your thoughts on that? Brian, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm sure. Glad to, but I'd like to get others involved here. I think, we see that technology, continuing to advance. There's going to be different applications that different types of storage are appropriate. Lithium ion has a certain longevity, duration of response that makes sense from an economic perspective. That's probably on the outside, 6 hours, maybe in that range. In terms of a practical perspective, but ultimately, that's some of those technologies are going to continue to develop, and I think creating a hybrid solution, some of what Dwight indicated with his flywheels, provides an opportunity to balance the different needs of the system.
Anybody else would like to share their thoughts on other battery technologies?
I'd just like to say I love the concept of flow batteries. I hope that they become more prolific and look forward to seeing them out in the field. I agree entirely with Brian that I think mixing different storage technologies is going to be the way forward to deal with some of the different challenges that storage presents in the short term, with very quick response times for frequency and voltage, through to the more obvious ones like the sun shining during the day and needing to use the energy at night.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. So we have just a couple of minutes left, too many questions to get through. So I'm just gonna squeeze one last question in, which has to do with cooling. St. Kitts is a warm climate, so is Jamaica. So Joma, I would like to turn this to you. How have you thought on dealing with cooling? How is it taken into consideration in, housing the large storage facility on the island?
Thank you. In terms of cooling, there is a preliminary design of the system in place, and I'm sure Brian can expand on this, but all of that has been taken into consideration. With the ambient temperature here being easily around 34 degrees Celsius, cooling definitely plays an important part in it. I'll let Brian give you the specifics of the design.
Yeah, indeed. I think that is an important part, and it's important to do a very thorough thermal management assessment in it going in. How is the battery going to be used, and how much cooling demand, or in some cases heating. There's a little heating in the northern climates, but in terms of cooling requirements, it just really takes into consideration. You have a very thorough thermal analysis assessment going in, and adding the right capacity. I mean, you're seeing battery systems going in, and in the Middle East in very, very hot conditions. And it just requires a little bit more cooling, frankly.
Dwight, do you have any remarks on cooling?
Yeah, so pretty much these containerized systems, they're pretty much all AC'd out from dedicated power supplies. So in terms of our ambient temperature, that's pretty much how we see it working. So far, it has been good. Temperatures are ideal for the batteries. We are keeping those temperatures ideal for the batteries. So, I mean, pretty much no challenges there. I just wanted to slip in from this last comment, from lessons learned here. If other islands are thinking about going into renewable heavily, I would suggest having some sort of storage system attached to those PPAs, ensure a smoother transition into renewable energy space. We are pretty much playing catch up right now. So just that lesson learned, I would want to also share.
Super, sounds great. So now we actually a minute overtime. Before we hang up, James, could we run the last poll to understand from which sectors our attendees were from? So just as a reminder, so please go ahead and answer us which sector best describes you. It's up right now on your screens. Meanwhile, please remember that the session has been recorded. You will have access to the recording. There was a lot of interesting information shared by each of the panelists. I again would like to thank each of the panelists for participating and sharing information. Brian Urban from Leclanche, Clement Joma Williams from Skelec, Scott McCaw from HowardScott, Dwight Richards from JPS. I don't know how about you guys, but for me, this I feel very optimistic about the future of renewables in the Caribbean, on the other islands, as well as everywhere else, of course, but with islands being more dependent and vulnerable on importing fossil fuels, it brings even more importance for us to have renewable systems, use as base load, use as frequency control, use as voltage stability control to become more affordable and become a reality. So thank you again to Island Innovation and the OECS for hosting this conference. And this wraps up our energy dependence for island nations, building sustainable and resilient microgrid session. Thank you so much for everybody for dialing in, for participating, and thank you again to our distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Dagmara.
Thank you, Dagmara.